Okay, so first and foremost, if we can make a quick introduction, Gianni, José, and if you can introduce yourself.
Okay, is this on? Great.
Yes.
My name is Gianni Colantuoni, and I am one of the co-founders of Wine X-Ray. The other co-founder is a fellow named Scott McLeod, and I'm assuming that a lot of you know or are familiar with Scott McLeod. Essentially, Scott is really a practitioner. Most of his focus comes from the winemaking side with a pretty heavy presence or experience on the vineyard side and also on the marketing side of things. I myself am the technical guy, if you will. I'm more into the engineering aspects, and I'm more into the understanding of the processes going on, not only in the vineyards, but also in the wineries, and then how we actually consume the wines. Both of us, though, are really looking at observing what is nature is doing for us, and also what the winemakers and the wine growers are doing. So what we're trying to do is that we try to not only provide the measurements, so we don't have to spend much time on the measurements, but actually using the measurements. So it used to be that we spend 70 or 80% of our time generating the measurements. That was 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Today, we spend 70, 80, or 90% of our time interpreting the results and then actually implementing the decisions and evaluating the wines or the operations in the vineyard.
Good. José?
Good morning, everyone. My name is José Santos. I'm the CEO of Enartis USA. Many of you might know us from our previous name, that was Vincre Laboratories. In addition to the laboratory services, we are also a supplier of laboratory supplies and winemaking products from the brand Enartis. Our relation, let's say, with this topic comes from the fact that we run this kind of analysis in our lab, but also sell the lab supplies. We interact quite frequently with winemakers, more on having the privilege of interacting them on the testing side, but also on the winemaking side, so by using our products and being involved in their process. So we try to maximize the synergies between the two departments and maximizing, let's say, both.
Eric?
Hi, I'm Eric Herve with ETS Labs, so I won't present ETS. I'm a research and development chemist there. About phenolics, so our phenolics method is an HPLC method. We'll talk about it later. It's been implemented in the lab by Steve Price, our phenolics specialist. The big challenge has been to turn a method that was belonging in research labs into something that is useful to winemakers, into a practical tool. And it wasn't that difficult as long as Steve Price was here all the time to babysit the instrument, if you want to be always there, integrating the chromatograms all the time. In the last couple of years, the big challenge has been really, well, what do we do after Steve Price? And that's it's a bigger challenge even because it's all about reproducibility. It's all about being able to generate the same numbers in different labs with different instruments, with different people running these instruments. And that's where we are now, and we are happy with the results.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you. Just for you to know, we put together a couple of questions that we thought it would be relevant for you, and we would like to start with the first two. If you want to start, Gianni, answering the first two questions. I can read them out loud. What is your lab actually measuring in terms of phenolics, and what can wine growers do with this kind of analysis? That's the first question. And the second one, and you can answer the two of them together, what analytical technique are you using to do that?
Okay. The analytical technique we already talked about. It's a Harvard Adams assay. It was published in around 2002, 2004, maybe a little later than that as well. In fact, you've used it in some of your publications. Scott and I started working with that assay starting in 2005, actually, and we worked what we call internally the classic Harberts and Adams assay between 2005 and 2009. And the reason why I'm making that difference is because if you look at the early implementation of the Harberts and Adams assay, whether it was strictly wet chemistry or automated wet chemistry, the results, that the measurements that you will see from that, if you check some of the publications, are really quite a bit different from what we're using today. Okay, so if I talk about the standard Harberts and Adams assay, there were 5 measurements. So I'm going to summarize what Federico presented there. One is the anthocyanins. The second one is the tannins. The third one is the polymeric pigments. And the fourth one is what we call the toluphenols, or toluphenolics. Now, we have to be a little bit careful here to really understand what those are. When we talk about anthocyanins that come from the classical Harberts and Adams assay, those are really the free anthocyanins, the reactive anthocyanins. Okay? The tannins, as Federico presented, is they're not the total tannins that we have in the wine, but the tannins that will react to the outer salivary proteins and then precipitate and consequently give us that astringency feeling. So it's protein precipitable tannins. So if you look at the number of tannins, and now you look at the Harberts and Adams measurements, they're going to be lower. Okay, so the other thing is, we're talking about the polymeric pigments. If you go back to the early days of the Harberts and Adams assay, we'll be talking about the large polymeric pigments and the small polymeric pigments. Okay, so there is an SPP number that you get with those measurements, and there is an LPP measurement that you get with with that technique. So we really have to add them if we want to have a chance of really comparing it to some of the other techniques. The last thing is that if you take a look at the total phenolics, those total phenolics are not the same as the ones that you measured through other techniques. Those are called iron reactive phenolics. And what that means is that we use ferric chloride to measure them. And what that means is they don't contain all the phenolics that are related to the color. So you see what I mean? You really have to, in order to interpret those measurements correctly, you really have to know what the difference is. So we worked on those, as I said, between 2006 and 2009. And the problem with the wet chemistry is that it's very laborious.
Gianni, sorry, just for the audience, can you clarify what you mean by wet chemistry?
Yeah, wet chemistry, we're talking about the classic Harberts and Adams assay.
So running the assay, that's wet chemistry.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking about a lot of chemical transformations. We're talking about a lot of physical transformations.
Yes, time.
A lot of time. And then there is one person in the middle that if you're not really focused on spending hours running those assays, invariably your variability is going to be really quite high. I have direct experience with that. I did this for a couple of years in the production environment, and that's when I realized that if this technique was going to be really very, very useful in the production environment, we needed to eliminate all those transformations. We had to make it faster, essentially real time, and then that way we can actually focus on how to use them, how to interpret it, and how to use them. So now, what we use since 2010, and that's when Scott and I created Wine X-ray, is what we call the extended Harberts and Adams assay. So we still produce 5 measurements, but the first one is the total color in the wine. So what you might not know is our eye actually sees only about 10 to 20% of the total color that is in that wine. So what we have to do is we have to have a measurement that we shift the pH, and then it really tells us how much anthocyanins we have in that wine. So when we talk about color, when we talk about anthocyanins, we're really talking about one measurement, total anthocyanins. The second measurement is the free anthocyanins, because those are the reactive ones. And the third one, we call it bounded anthocyanins or polymeric pigments, and what that is just the sum of the small polymeric pigments and the large polymeric pigments. The tannins are exactly the same, and the toluphenols are exactly the same. So we call the protein precipitable tannins and the iron reactive phenolics. Those are the same. So the 5 measurements that we're looking at today that our clients use from our website are quite a bit different from the 5 measurements that were done a way back. Now, the second part of the question is, where do we use this stuff? Okay, we have a whole list of applications that we work in a number of different clients on this. But if I were to classify the most common ones, number 1 is track your maceration. Number 2, track the berry quality in your vineyards. And number 3 is look at the styles that you're making, and you can apply the same type of technology to the bottled wines and the wines that actually you will be either drinking or selling out there. So those are the focus of the applications, and we spend, again, like I said, right now we spend more than 80 or 90% of our time just interpreting and using those measurements.
Thank you.
So regarding the methodologies that we offer, since we have the lab and we have also the lab supplies department, we actually offer in both sides. In the lab side, we actually, when I joined the company back in 2010, we were running the Adams Arvidsson by hand. That will basically block one analyst most of the day to run one sample, so it was very cost effective. And at the time, we initiated a relationship with the Australian Wine Research Institute, and that's when we decided, at the time, the Wine Cloud was called the 10 in Portugal. And at the time, we established this partnership with them, and we implemented in our lab this measurement. That is basically an indirect method that uses a spectral calibration based on the MCP method, the methyl cellulose precipitation method, to measure, let's say, not exactly the same, but we can call them the same 5 parameters that we were talking before. The big advantage and our vision, let's say at the time, to introduce this measurement was to allow not only for our lab to provide an analysis that was timely, and even though it wasn't measuring the actual compounds, but will give some degree of information, some information that could be actionable, and that winemakers could take pressing decisions or harvesting decisions, whatever they want, based on those numbers. But also something that the winery could implement in-house and do it themselves. So with the Wine Cloud, this is possible. So, and we got quite familiarized with it, and we use it on a regular basis also internally for different trials that we run and such. And initially, we introduced it only for analysis in wine. We were not using it for grape analysis. More recently, we have introduced it also for grape analysis. The challenge with the grape analysis is introducing another variable, that is the extraction method. Which method are you going to use? So as a standard, we decided to introduce what we call the exhaustive method, so a very harsh extraction. So we use a very powerful blender to completely destroy the grape sample. And then we do an extraction for 1 hour with 50% ethanol acidified, and then we do this measurement. The beauty of this method is that after the sample prep, which you only need in the grapes, and it doesn't take that long, you only need basically 1 hour incubation, and you just need to read a few absorbances, input the data in the portal, and you have a result. And then you can take an action on that. With time progressing, we also found the need of having, let's say, a more detailed analysis, and we have also implemented the HPLC method, which we run for, I would say, probably a much more limited set of customers, and that are used in different settings. In terms of how these, or the most common use of this analysis, I would say that mainly we have customers using them for tracking fermentation, so tracking extraction throughout the fermentation and taking pressing decisions. More recently, mainly in customers that started using more in wines and taking blending decisions. So one example, which of course I will not provide the name, but we have a very interesting case of a customer that is actually combining or comparing or correlating, to be correct, the data from their consumer preference of the wines with the phenolic data and taking blended decisions based on that, so which is quite interesting. And they, based on their feedback with, if they know the preference on 3 wines, they can predict the next wine that will be purchased by that customer with 80% accuracy. And if it's with 5 wines, they can predict with 92% accuracy. So it's quite interesting project. I would say blending, definitely. A lot of, I would say in the grape analysis, I would say it's mainly vineyard trials and comparing vineyard trials or grading of grapes, mainly vineyard management companies that may use that as a selling point and may be grading different vineyards and try to upsell those vineyards. But it's still fairly new. We have only introduced these methods in our lab 2 years ago, so we still don't have a lot of data. And just to finalize, in terms of what we can offer as another test that can be run in-house, we established a partnership with NomaSense just last year, and we had the first year of using the Polyscan, which is a very simple device that uses electrochemistry. So you basically have I'm dry. Basically, you get a electrochemical fingerprint of a wine, of a sample, and it gives 2 numbers, easy-ox and phenox. Phenox relates, I would say, roughly with total phenols. Easy-ox is basically easily oxidizable phenols. And this can be very useful because the analysis takes seconds, so in 1 minute you have a result. It's very simple. You just drop 1 drop of juice or wine into a small electrode, insert it in the machine, read, and the main advantage is allowing you to take an immediate decision. We had a lot of success mainly in sparkling wine producers that were deciding on the press fractions based on that and blending press fractions, or in terms of red wines, mainly using the phenox as a way to determine when to stop the skin contact and when to decide to press.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so at ETS we use a direct method, so the an HPLC method. As Federico was saying, it works really well for small compounds, much more difficult for tannins, polymeric anthocyanins. But Steve Price again came out with a way to squeeze the tannin peak so that we can have a decent chromatographic peak and have a reliable measurements. So that was the breakthrough. What do we measure? So what we measure has to do with mostly with the mouth feel of red wines. Color, okay. But mouthfeel mostly. So the main thing that people look at, first thing to look at is your tannin number. And tannin number can be extremely variable, even for the same wine. Napa Valley Cabernet, it varies from 600 to 1400. So more than a 2-fold difference. I'm not telling you what is right, what is wrong. It's all a question of style, okay? Then second thing to look at is catechin, which is an indicator of seediness. Are your tannins mostly coming from skins or more from seeds? And as Federico said, when they're coming from seeds, they're much more astringent. So that's our indicative, that's our measurement of indirect of astringency, if you want, but at least the origin of the tannins. Then, okay, these 2 parameters, that's what you get, that's what you extract. And then there's something else that you can do. You can soften your tannins. That's micro-ox, that's what it is. And then the indicator of that, that's your polymeric anthocyanins or pigmented tannins, same thing, okay? that's modified tannins bound with anthocyanins, and they are softer in the process. Next thing to look at, so we give total anthocyanins. With grapes, we give also quercetin, which is the sunscreen. So that's the indicator of sun exposure. With grapes, Steve's idea, so we worked back in the late 90s, so a while ago, with the Glories assay from Bordeaux. We didn't like too much what we saw. It was highly unreproducible. Steve came out with a partial extract, meaning the berries, your berries are not ground up, they are just popped, and we cook them basically with alcohol, heat, and then we end up with an extract that is wine-like in its composition, and we can analyze by HPLC. And it's a good prediction of the potential of the grapes, and it's a hybrid information that you're getting. It's not the total content, it has more to do with what can end up in wine. Okay? So that was about the analytical technique. So, but by the way, it's getting more and more popular, I would say. And now you have the tools, okay, to work with phenolics. Let's say that you have a discussion with fellow winemakers. What is your favorite vintage? And I'm sure quite a few of you will answer 2013, right? But somebody's gonna say, 2013, not as much, it was too big. Too much tannins, it was too much. To me, we like wines that are a little bit more subtle. Well, guess what? You could see it coming. You could measure it, you could have a good sense of that early during your harvest, because yes, you could see that you had a very strong tannin potential, and they were very easily extractable. The risk was to overshoot your target, okay? Following year, 2014, completely the opposite. Low tannin year, difficult to extract. Again, you had the ways to see it early, and even from grape analysis. So you could take action. If you like winemaking ingredients, you could go see José and ask for sacrificial tannins by that. If you don't, saignée. But if your goal is was to make a big wine with high tannins, in most cases, it was impossible to reach. Okay? So again, that's I think it's tests that are here to last. Mm-hmm. Now you have the tools, and we're happy we can help you make more consistent wines.
Perfect. Okay. Perfect. So at this point, does any one of you have a burning question for the panelists? If not, I have questions, but I just want to open the discussion for any of you. This is your opportunity here. Yeah, there is a question there.
Thank you, guys. My question is about the reliability of these tests. It sounds like there's a lot of potentially different ways to come to similar conclusions, and I'm curious about if there's any publication, or if you guys have thought about putting into the results that you give us, the kind of the consumer here, an accuracy level of this test, because it sounds like some are more accurate than others, different methodologies are more accurate. I'm just interested if you can give us kind of a better idea of, is this within a range, or is this very tight?
As far as wine X-ray is concerned, I can tell you that we spent probably a couple of years, 2 to 3 years, running the Herve and Adams assay, and then we had to modify it to make sure that the variability that I had was within single digits error. And I can share that information with you. We don't have it on our website, but that might be something that is actually worth looking at. The other thing is, we applied a technology that is called Six Sigma, that really is a gauge R&R, so you really can calculate the degree of repeatability and reproducibility that you have. That's standard worldwide, and in other process industries, it's used all the time. So we spent quite a bit of time on that. We did it not just by a couple of calculations, but an integrated technology for actually doing that. And the other thing that I have to mention to you is that When we talk about these calibrations that we use, when you actually upload the samples to our website, it's not just one calibration. It's a matrix of calibrations that if you tell the system that this is Cabernet Sauvignon from 2018, you don't have to worry about selecting whatever the calibration is. The system automatically actually selects that. So I guess what I'm saying is I worked for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years. I'm making sure that not only my running the wet chemistry was entirely reproducible in the single digits error, but then I had to demonstrate through a validation process that not only I had that with the calibration, but also I can obtain that in the field. In fact, a lot of times when we work with customers in different regions, what we actually go through is a validation process. You know, I take 2 dozen samples or something like that. I run the wet chemistry. I run the UV-Vis on our website, and then I can provide a report to those clients who want to see that. What is the actual repeatability? And it's in the single digits for sure. I mean, it changes a little bit between the bilanthocyanins, for example, are kind of rough, but the toluphenols and the tannins and the tolanthocyanins, I mean, we're talking about 2 to 5%. So, and remember, this is one thing that I think is important. There's one thing about being in the academic environment and looking at accuracy, in the analytical environment and looking at accuracy as well. But most of my experience has been in the production environment. In the production environment, what we're after is repeatability. If we can make a connection between the accurate and the repeatable, and I can do the analysis in a much faster way, I still have a high degree of confidence that what I measure is actually fit for purpose. The purpose of online, on the floor, taking the measurements and then taking actions on that. So I can talk to you a lot more about that, but that's in a nutshell. Yeah, it's a very, very important part of the whole infrastructure that you have to create to make sure that that's available.
I would just say that definitely a lot of what Gianni said applies also to our case, and I completely agree that on the production environment, what you are looking for is more the reproducibility of the test, not so much the accuracy. With the wine cloud in particular, it comes when you get set up to run it. You need to run on your UV-Vis spec for a full week a standard that you need to provide that information back to the AWRI so they calibrate, let's say, or adjust the spectral calibration to your spectrophotometer. And then every day when you run the analysis, you need to read that calibration cuvette. So it may detect any variations and results that will fall outside the specs. Sort of an anecdotal situation. When we first started, we actually found out that our spec was dying through this calibration cuvette because we could not get the portal to really retrieve the results. And after further investigation, we understood that the lamp was dying and we needed to replace it.
Yes, so precision, reproducibility, that's always challenging. So we're getting at the same level pretty much. We're talking about a few percent, more or less. Accuracy to us matters a lot. And by the way, with HPLC, because we can, but the reproducibility also from year to year, you want to be able to compare your results from 5 years ago to the ones that you're getting now. Okay, when you have different sites, let's say the results in the lab in Paso, they must be the same results that we would get at ETS. I don't know if that answers your question.
Is there any more questions? Yes, there is one here.
Three labs to see what the results were, not because we were challenging anyone, but just we wanted to see what they were. So we sent the same sample to Wine X-Ray, ETS, and Enologics, which is not here today. We found that the numbers were different, but they trended within themselves. And so it was just basically you pick one and then you follow your wine through that process, because that way you know what you're looking for, and you know how, like, it's different correctly within each system. So whoever you're most familiar with, looking at the results, that tended to be what we found was the best result for us.
Awesome. That's a good comment.
Yes, well, I'd like to answer that a little bit. That's the results are really method dependent, okay, completely. Two things. So precipitation for tannins, which again, precipitation-based assay, they're going to give you a hybrid information if you want. That's not only how much tannin there is, that's how reactive they are to whatever reagent was used to precipitate them. Okay? And there's big differences between the methods. Federico was talking about it. What you can have, look at the AWRI website. If you want, there's a comparison of both methods. One method, so the methyl cellulose assay, tends actually to precipitate stuff that we wouldn't call tannins, and it goes really high. Okay, the other assay, there's like a threshold effect. It starts to detect something only when a critical mass is reached. Okay, so but what matters is to know about it, and then you can use they're both useful. With us, with HPLC, again, we measure an amount of tannin, and then we measure. Okay, we try to get a sense of, are they mostly from seeds? Are they mostly from skins? And I'm going to give you an example. Who went to the IQ conference last year at the Silverado Country Club? Nobody? Or maybe a few people. Okay. There was an excellent presentation from Simon Forey yes, so he's a big wine X-ray user. He's a winemaker at Starmont. Okay. So, and the wine, for sure it works for him, clearly. And he was presenting wines, and he was showing the wine X-ray numbers. And the wines had been analyzed by ETS too. So you had the two numbers. And there were two wines, and you would look at the wine X-ray numbers, they were very different. You would look at the ETS number, the tannin number was pretty much identical. So logical reaction, one of them has to be wrong. Not at all. Not at all. And actually, and you would taste, and you would find that one of the wines was more astringent than the other. So you say, wine X-ray is right. But you would look then at the ETS numbers, look at tannin and catechin. One had a catechin number about twice as high, meaning that you had the same amount of tannin, yes, but the makeup of the tannin was very different. Okay? So different, so very different numbers, but you're getting the same information in the end.
Good, perfect. So it looks like we need to answer question number 3. That seems like a burning question. Everyone wants to hear your take on how phenolics drive picking decisions when making decisions and aging decisions. Do you want to start? Yeah, that's what they want to know.
Ooh, that's a long one. We can spend about at least a couple of hours on each one of those.
Yeah, make it 1 minute, Gianni.
Okay. Thanks. Well, let me say this, okay? If we're talking about picking decisions, it's all about some of the stuff that we saw today in terms of tracking the berry quality that you have. And we do that very similar to some of the ways that were presented here today. But essentially what we do is over the last few years, we have our own protocol, our own extraction protocol that would give us the extractable anthocyanins from those berries. But essentially what we do is this, okay, and what I would think that you might want to do. There are 3 components to this thing. First, make sure you sample your vineyards in a way that is representative not only for that particular block, but also the way that you want to pick those grapes. Okay, that's something that you have to do your homework. So the second thing is you decide to pick the berries, whatever the number is, usually about 300 is what most people use. And the first thing you can get out of that is the berry size. Very simple, okay? Just count the berries, weigh them, okay? And that gives you the berry size. And if you track it, what we have observed is that there is what I call an umbrella parameter in the fruit maturity, which is the berry size. And it looks like an umbrella. Early on, the berry is increasing in size. It reaches a peak, and depending on what conditions that are out there, what your irrigation strategies and the other stuff is present, then you actually might have a decrease in the berry size. And that's very common in regions like ours here because we actually stress our vines quite a bit. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you can actually take those berries, you crush them, you separate the juice from the skins and the seeds. Now you measure your Brix, your pH, and your TA. You take those measurements, but don't use those measurements, convert those to loadings, okay? Because the Brix is confounded by the status, the water status of not only the vine, but also of the berries. And the last one is, the last step is, you take those skins and seeds, you incubate them, and now you have a way of extracting the anthocyanins. In my view, that's better than crushing the berries, because then you get a mixture of all sorts of stuff over there, and you get far away from one of the important things about the berries is the extractability factors. So there are three umbrellas. One is a berry size, the other one is a sugar loading, and the other one is the anthocyanin loadings, and we actually use the last one for the for a guidance on what the picking decision is, and that's entirely up to the winemakers and the grape growers to decide what type of fruit they actually want to bring in and for what reason. So there's quite a bit there. There's a protocol that you have to follow. There is a way of actually obtaining parameters from the berries that are very much related to the size, the sugar loading, and the anthocyanins. When we come to the winemaking decisions, I mentioned that the maceration time, which is not only primary fermentation, but also secondary fermentation, that's critical. In fact, all the color, depending on your protocol, of course, but all the color really comes out very early on. So there is a zone there you got to keep your eye on if you actually want and interested in getting the most color out of your berries as you can. The second step is to look at the level of structure that you have in the must, because that's going to be directly related to the size of the wine that you're going to have there. And the third one is that as soon as you see that peak, and some of us don't like to exceed the temperature above 80, 85 on that. Some of us like to really get it up there at 100. Well, once the peak of the color is there, then you can actually measure and pull the temperature back to where the yeast is happy. As soon as the yeast is happy, you have the level of tannins, level of structure in the wine, and now the job is keep tracking the bound anthocyanins, because those are the ones that are actually going to fill in the mid-palate, and it's actually going to provide a pretty significant sensory component out there. Now, the other thing is, as far as the bound anthocyanins is concerned, they form in the latter part of primary fermentation, and as I think, Thibaut, you mentioned this, when you look at the malolactic fermentation, that you can increase the bound anthocyanins in my experience, up to 45 or 50%. I think you said something 80, 85%. Now, that is strictly a winemaking choice. If you want a lot of bound anthocyanins, yes, then you have a way of putting it there. If you don't, then you also know where you are. And the last one, aging decisions. Yeah, you can track what happens to the phenolic components of the wine as a function of time, whether it's during your early aging age, prior to bottling age, and in fact, even how you are actually aging those wines, either in your cellar or in the marketplace. So there are a lot of applications associated. I just mentioned just two or three of them.
Perfect. So Jose, maybe you can focus more on winemaking decisions and aging decisions quickly, and probably provide a couple of examples.
Okay, I will actually like to give one that is.
Oh, please do, by all means.
On the picking decision.
On picking decision.
We have very little experience yet because, as I mentioned, we only started offering the grape analysis 2 years ago. But one thing that I strongly suggest our customers is don't look at one number, don't look at a very narrow set of numbers. Try to look as much as possible to the full picture. we see very often people waiting after there is complete sugar accumulation, waiting and waiting and waiting to pick the grapes based on the phenolics that the majority of the times they don't measure. So that will be probably good advice is, if you are doing this, measure those and don't wait too late, because then you will be facing other issues, that is higher potassium, very high pH, and that then you need to deal with afterwards. In terms of winemaking decisions, I would definitely, our customers have been using it mainly to take pricing decisions, but more recently, also understanding how one vintage varies against the other in terms of extractability, and how they are seeing the progression of extraction to auto-fermentation in the same conditions. And they may decide to either change the fermentation conditions, the cap management, the use of enological enzymes or whatever, so they can fine-tune a little bit the process to maximize the extraction in the time that they need. And jumping a little bit towards, not necessarily right now the maturation, but period between alcoholic and malolactic, that where you can potentially intervene in maximizing the formation of polymeric pigment. It's definitely understanding those numbers, understanding where you are and how those compare to your target or to your historical values. You can use micro-ox at that point, or you can delay the ML in order to allow, if the wine is in barrel, to allow natural micro-oxygenation with a barrel. In terms of aging, I would say that definitely you can understand how the wine will evolve and decide on whether a certain wine will have the conditions to be aged for a certain time in a certain type of barrel. But mainly, as I mentioned previously, I would say that more than the aging, our customers have been using mainly in terms of taking blending decisions and identifying the lots that will go into specific blends and decide on what to do with us.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so maybe to go back a little bit to the numbers, what they mean, and how to educate yourself about what they mean. Usually people you would start with a tasting. And it can be very expensive wines. Okay, you're going to spend more in wines than in analysis. But what you can do is to take samples with a Coravin. So you can take samples from your bottles 2 weeks before you plan your tasting, and then you do your tasting with numbers. And then if you choose HPLC, if you did with HPLC, you can taste, okay, typical Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon, again, about 1,000 for tannin. You're going to taste the difference between 700 and 1,400. For wines that have about 1,000, between the ones with low seediness, about 5 ppm of catechin, and high seed wines with about 20, you're going to taste the difference, and you're going to see what it means for you. And then you decide your targets, and you can decide on different targets for different styles of wines. It doesn't matter. And again, you have the tools to analyze that during your fermentation, during your maceration, to try to reach these targets. Okay. Again, there will be years it will be difficult. Years it will be easy to overshoot, but that's the goal, to have these tools.
Perfect, perfect. Well, with that, I'm just going to mention two. I know we run out of time, but I'm just going to make a point on 2 points that the three of you mentioned at some point, and it's very important. I think, I guess what I wanted to create with this session is something practical for you. And there are two specific points that are of very high practical relevance. First and foremost, this is super boring, but sampling. Sampling. I consult on phenolics, and sometimes people come to me and say the numbers, they don't make sense. And say, how do you sample the grapes? From where? I mean, like, we cannot transform this session on a sampling session, but please be aware that sometimes we see a spike and numbers all over the place simply because sampling has gone wrong. And I cannot even tell you what happened during sampling, during winemaking. There is people that sample after the first punch down. There is people that sample after the second punch down. There is people that sample at any time. And then it's difficult to make sense of those numbers. That's very important. The second, last point, as a closing point, I work on phenolics, that's my area of expertise, but I hope you are not short-sighted just to believe that phenolics are the answer for everything. Phenolics need to be seen on the context of other analysis and on the context of the sensory composition of the wine. Okay, someone mentioned I often see people waiting for phenolics to go down on the seeds and on the seeds, and they forget about Brix, pH, potassium. That's wrong. Don't do that. I mean, you cannot base decisions, picking decisions, pressing decisions on just one single number. Because wine is not just one single number. It's an integration of chemistry with a specific sensory impact. Those are the 2 points. Good? Okay, with that, I guess we are run out of time, so we need to go.